UK government and the people in the UK who take an interest in these things are still very supportive of Ukraine. There's a very strong sense that Ukraine has been the victim of aggression from Russia, and that is bad for European security, and that the UK, with our other partners and allies, need to be doing everything we can to support Ukraine. Now, obviously, the decision by the British people to vote to leave the European Union has made a difference. We've been in the European Union since 1973, and this is going to be a change, a new chapter in our relationship with the continent of Europe. But it's something that's been coming over a long time. It didn't suddenly come overnight on the 24th of June last year. Britain has not had an easy relationship being in the European Union. When Winston Churchill, after the Second World War, made speeches talking about the United States of Europe, he didn't think that Britain would be part of that. He thought this would be United States of Europe with Britain helping it and supporting it from outside. So you see, this idea has a long background. Britain remains one of the world's 6 largest economies, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, one of the group of 7, and so on and so forth, and will remain a major contributor to European security, both through NATO and outside. At the Yes conference in Kiev 2 weeks ago, the British minister who was speaking there, Sir Alan Duncan, I thought gave a rather good answer to the question, what does Britain have to say to Ukraine? Britain is leaving the European Union, Ukraine would like to join the European Union. And his answer was democracy. In Ukraine, the people, more and more of the people, are saying they see their future in the European Union. In Britain, we've had a referendum and the majority have said they would prefer to be outside the European Union. Now, I, like Alan Duncan, voted to remain in, but that's not the point. The majority of the people voted to leave.
What exactly can Ukraine in this framework expect? You know, there are different kind of, London has to renegotiate a lot of issues with Brussels. And with many other countries since now. So really, would it change somehow the trade or some other security issues, or even some people say there are some opportunities because now the Britain can show that her influence outside of European Union?
Well, I think there's one obvious opportunity, and that will be in trade. Now, as long as Britain is a member of the European Union, we can't have independent trade arrangements, but once we leave, we will do. And we will be very ready to have a free trade agreement, to negotiate good trade agreements, not just with Ukraine, but with countries around the world. So there's an opportunity there, that will change. But on other things, like the support that Britain is giving to Ukraine, whether it's technical assistance, whether it's military training, all sorts of different support, that will continue.
If we go to the issue of the Ukrainian reforms, we're talking about the reforms for a few years already. Chatham House is doing a lot to make, to analyze them, to explain them to the international public and understand. So what is your take on that?
I think my summary would be a lot has been done and there's a lot still to do. If you look at the big picture, what has happened since the Revolution of Dignity is far, far more reforms, deeper reforms, than in all the 20 and more years of independent Ukraine before that. Now you've got a government with pressure from civil society, with support from the international community, that has got serious about reform in many, many areas. There have been a whole series of free elections. The economy, from being in a real mess early in 2014, has now been stabilised and is growing again. The gas sector isn't buying gas from Russia. And all those opportunities for corruption have been taken away, the subsidies have been taken away. And I could go on and on. The banking sector is being cleaned up. Higher education, there's new laws there. But of course there's a lot still to do. And one of the most important areas is what to do about the courts and the judiciary, where the government has made a start, the constitution's been changed, the law's been changed, but they're now grinding through this process of choosing, well, who should the new judges be? Are they qualified? Are they the right people? And it's going to take time to work through that. They haven't really started yet on the prosecution service, the Prosecutor General. And there are the other difficult, big economic questions. There's still a huge number of state-owned enterprises in Ukraine. They need to get on with the process of deciding if they need to be owned by the state. If not, do they need to exist? Should they be privatized? What about land? How to encourage people to invest in the land and so on. If you look at the statistics, the level of foreign direct investment in Ukraine is very low. It's much lower than it should be, given the resources and the skills in the country. And the reasons are not difficult to find. If you ask foreign companies what they find difficult, what deters them, it very often comes back to lack of trust in the courts. If they have contracts, will those contracts be enforced fairly? I think on top of that, since 2014, you've had the conflict in the east. And when you ask people outside Ukraine what they think about Ukraine, most people say, oh, there's a war going on, isn't there? And they think of that as if it's the whole country at war, not just a bit in the Donbass. So stabilizing, bringing peaceful resolution to that is important, but also providing the institutions, and particularly the courts and the prosecution service, which are trusted by Ukrainians, but also trusted by foreign investors to be fair and to enforce their contracts.
So, and then we can't speak without having an elephant in the room and mentioning it. To what extent do you think the status quo in the conflict in Donbass and Crimea is kind of manageable for Ukraine?
Well, the first thing I would say, but this is more for people outside Ukraine, is don't forget Crimea. Crimea was illegally annexed. The United Nations General Assembly, by a large majority, said that it was an illegal act. And on that basis, the international community has imposed sanctions on Russia, Crimea-specific sanctions, which should stay in force until that illegal action has been reversed. But I accept that may take a long time. Turning to Donbass, it has looked in the last 2 years as if it's settled into a sort of stalemate where there's fighting going on but at a low level and areas of control are not changing hands. So it's still tragic and people are getting killed and losing their lives, and there are many, many thousands of people who can't go back to their homes. But I think in the last few months, and even more recently, the last few weeks, there have been 1 or 2 signs for hope. One sign of hope is that the United States is now showing more interest in finding a resolution to that. They've appointed a very good man, Kurt Volker, as the special representative to Ukraine, and he's getting involved with all the parties to the Normandy format and the Minsk negotiations, I think in a very helpful way. And the other is that after about 2 years, when Ukraine has put forward the idea of a peacekeeping operation and Russia didn't want to hear, Russia has now started talking about a possible peacekeeping operation in the Donbass. Now, the proposal that Russia has put forward is not acceptable as it stands, because for a peacekeeping operation to be successful, and first of all, there has to be a peace to keep. There isn't at the moment, but you need a peace, and then you need a group of forces to come in who are not from the conflicting parties, but are impartial. So you can't have Russia in that peacekeeping force. It can't be like Transnistria or South Ossetia with Russian peacekeepers. It's got to be from other countries. And then the peacekeeping force has to cover the whole of the area in dispute, the occupied area, and obviously very importantly, the border between Ukraine and Russia. It mustn't just reinforce the contact line and the separation between those territories. Now, if those conditions will be met, that will show if Russia is really interested in finding a peaceful solution to the Donbass. So we will see.